I died on a Tuesday, freezing in a hospital hallway while my husband bought his mistress a diamond the size of a grape. When I opened my eyes again, the heart monitor was gone. I was sitting at my dining room table, and he was asking for a divorce. The smell hit me first. Burnt coffee. The bitter, acidic stench of Folgers left on the heating plate for 3 hours. I inhaled sharply, my lungs expanding. They worked. They didn't rattle. There was no fluid pooling at the base of my chest. No agonizing pressure radiating down my left arm. I gripped the edge of the faux oak dining table. The wood grain was slightly peeling at the corner. I knew this table. I bought it at a thrift store on 4th Street when Julian and I first moved in together. Clara, are you even listening to me? I blinked. The blinding white lights of the emergency room faded, replaced by the dim yellow glow of our kitchen pendant light. Sitting across from me was Julian. He wasn't wearing the custom Italian suit I'd bought him for his promotion. He was wearing his gray collegiate sweater, the one with the frayed cuffs. He looked younger. His hairline hadn't started its slow retreat. I checked the digital clock on the microwave. October 14th, 2018, 5 years ago. My breath hitched. I had died in 2023, bankrupt and alone. My body giving out from a stress-induced coronary, while Julian finalized his acquisition of my grandfather's estate. And now, I was here, breathing, alive. I said, Julian repeated, his tone laced with that familiar patronizing edge. It's just a temporary separation. Clara. Vanessa is going through a terrible time. She needs a friend right now. Someone who understands her. We have history. You know that. Vanessa. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Vanessa Jensen. His high school sweetheart. The woman he claimed was just a friend, until I caught them in my own bed 4 years later. In my previous life. This was the exact moment I shattered. I had cried. I had begged. I had thrown myself at his feet and promised to be better. To work less. To pay for whatever he needed so long as he didn't leave me. I had drained my trust fund to finance his startup just to prove my devotion. It bought me 5 miserable years of gaslighting before he took the company public, ousted me from the board, and left me with a mountain of his hidden debt. I looked at him now. Really looked at him. Without the lens of desperate, pathetic love. Julian was just a mediocre man with a weak chin and a talent for emotional manipulation. He was nervously tapping his fingers against his coffee mug, waiting for the hysterics. He thrived on them. You want a divorce? I said. My voice was completely flat. No tremor. No tears. Julian blinked, taken aback by the word. I didn't say divorce. I said space. Clara, you're being dramatic. Vanessa just moved back to town. Her engagement fell apart and she's fragile. So go be with her. I said. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but they held my weight. I walked over to the coffee pot, turned off the burner and dumped the sludge into the sink. What are you doing? Julian asked, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum. Are you doing that passive-aggressive thing again? Because I can't handle you freezing me out right now. I'm not freezing you out, Julian. I grabbed a dish towel and dried my hands, moving methodically. I needed to keep moving, or I was going to scream and tear his eyes out. You want to go to Vanessa? Go. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers by Monday. He stood up, his face flushing with a mix of confusion and sudden anger. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to beg. You're just going to throw 3 years of marriage away. Just like that? He scoffed, crossing his arms. The hypocrisy was so dense you could choke on it. I guess I finally see how much this meant to you. You're cold, Clara. You've always been cold. Pack a bag. I replied, ignoring the bait. Or don't. I'll box up whatever you leave behind and have it couriered to her apartment. I assume you know the address. He opened his mouth to argue, to spin another web, but something in my eyes stopped him. In my past life, I was a 26-year-old girl terrified of being alone. Now I was a 31-year-old ghost who had already felt her own heart stop beating. He didn't pack much, just his toiletries and a duffel bag of clothes. He paused at the front door, looking back at me with a manufactured expression of sorrow. I hope you find peace, Clara. I really do. The door clicked shut, I stood in the silence of the apartment. Then, I walked into the bathroom, gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, and stared at my reflection. My skin was pale. My eyes were wide. I was alive. A laugh bubbled up from my chest. Sharp and ragged. It echoed off the tiles, growing louder until I was sobbing and laughing all at once. I was alive. I had my health. But more importantly, I had my money. In exactly 2 weeks, Julian was going to ask me to co-sign a massive small business loan using my grandfather's trust as collateral. Not this time. This time, I was going to let him dig his own grave. And when he reached the bottom, I'd be the one holding the shovel. The divorce was aggressively, almost insultingly fast. Julian's lawyer was a cheap shark who thought he was dealing with a heartbroken, irrational housewife. He pushed for Julian to keep the house, the car, and a modest alimony stipend to help him transition into his new life. I gave them the house. I gave them the car. I even smiled when I signed the papers. My lawyer, a sharp, cynical woman named Rebecca, had pulled me into the hallway outside the mediator's office. "Clara, you are legally entitled to half the equity in that property. He bought it during the marriage. Why are you handing him a $400,000 asset?" "Because," I told her, keeping my voice low, "it has an adjustable rate mortgage that balloons in 18 months. The roof is rotting from the inside out, and the foundation on the south side is sinking. It's a money pit. Let him drown in it." Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. "You want to keep your grandfather's trust completely untouched?" "Exactly. I keep the liquid cash. He keeps the liabilities disguised as assets." When we went back into the room, Julian was practically vibrating with smugness. Vanessa was waiting for him in the lobby. I saw her through the glass partition, blonde, petite, clutching a designer handbag she definitely couldn't afford on a substitute teacher's salary. She looked at me with an expression of polite pity as I walked out. "Clara," Vanessa said, stepping forward, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I just want you to know I never meant for any of this to happen. You're so strong. I admire that." I stopped. I looked at her, really taking in the woman who had worn my clothes, slept in my bed, and convinced my husband to drain my life savings in another timeline. "Save it, Vanessa," I said smoothly. "He's your problem now. Make sure he remembers to pay the property taxes. They're due in November." I walked out of the building, the crisp autumn air hitting my face. I had $3 million in an untouchable trust fund, a clean slate, and a very specific memory of the next 5 years of global economics. I didn't waste a single day. I moved to a modest apartment in the financial district and went to work. I had a degree in economics that I had abandoned to support Julian's career. Now, I put it to use. I didn't want to just invest in the stock market. I wanted institutional power. Over the next 2 years, I aggressively networked my way into a boutique private equity firm, Sterling and Partners. They specialized in acquiring distressed regional banks and restructuring their debt. I started as an analyst, working 80-hour weeks. The work was brutal, but I didn't care. I didn't need sleep. I had already slept enough in a morgue. My eerie ability to predict market downturns, thanks to my memories, quickly caught the attention of the senior partners. By year 3, I was a junior partner managing my own portfolio of acquisitions. I kept tabs on Julian and Vanessa, not out of longing, but out of strategic necessity. They were living exactly how I remembered. Predictable. Arrogant. Julian had launched his tech startup, a bloated logistical software company that sounded revolutionary on paper but was hemorrhaging cash in reality. He was a salesman, not an engineer. Vanessa, meanwhile, had fully embraced the role of the wealthy founder's wife. She documented every second of it online. I watched her Instagram stories from my office desk. There was Vanessa, posing in front of a brand new Range Rover. Vanessa, showing off the massive renovations to the house, the same house whose foundation was slowly crumbling. Vanessa, flashing her engagement ring, a diamond the size of a grape. My stomach gave a phantom lurch, remembering the cold hospital hallway. I pushed the feeling down, replacing it with cold, hard numbers, to fund their lifestyle and the failing startup. Julian had to borrow heavy. In my past life, he used my trust fund. In this life, he had to use banks. He went to Pinnacle Trust, a mid-sized regional bank known for its aggressive lending practices and terrible risk management. They approved Julian for a massive commercial loan backed by the equity in the house and his inflated projections for the startup. Pinnacle Trust was a house of cards. I knew this because in my previous life, their collapse in 2022 had made national news. I walked into the senior partner's office at Sterling and Partners with a thick manila folder. Pinnacle Trust, I said, dropping the file on his mahogany desk. They're over-leveraged in local commercial real estate and tech startups. Their risk assessment protocols are practically non-existent. In 12 months, they are going to default on their own obligations. We need to start buying up their distressed debt portfolios now at a heavy discount. The partner opened the file, scanning the numbers. This is a local player. Clara. A bit small for our usual appetite. It's a stepping stone. I countered. We buy the debt for pennies. When they inevitably face insolvency, we leverage the debt to force a buyout. We take the bank. We acquire all their underlying assets. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing in calculation. You've researched this thoroughly. Intimately. I said. All right. He agreed. Draw up the proposal. You lead the acquisition. I walked back to my office, my heart beating a steady, victorious rhythm. Julian had always wanted to be a big man. He wanted to play with the banks. He had no idea he was playing with me. They got married in the spring of 2021. It was an obnoxious affair, 300 guests, a rented chateau outside the city, and a spread in a local lifestyle magazine. Vanessa wore a custom gown that cost more than my first car. Julian looked like the king of the world, grinning for the cameras, holding a glass of vintage champagne. I didn't attend, obviously, but I had a front row seat to the financials behind the scenes. Pinnacle Trust had funded the whole circus through a personal line of credit Julian had secured just weeks before. He was bleeding money. His software was glitchy. Clients were abandoning contracts. Payroll was eating him alive. Yet, instead of cutting costs, he and Vanessa doubled down. They bought a vacation cabin by the lake. Vanessa opened a high-end boutique downtown that sold overpriced candles and linen shirts. Another loan. Another lien. Every time they signed a piece of paper, my firm bought it. I had set up a subsidiary holding company, Summit Capital, specifically to warehouse Pinnacle Trust's high-risk debt. I spent 18 months quietly purchasing bundles of their commercial and personal loans. Julian's name kept popping up in the ledgers, a glowing red beacon of incoming default. Then, the market shifted. It happened exactly when I knew it would. Interest rates hiked. The easy venture capital money dried up. Tech startups began laying off employees by the thousands. Sitting in my corner office, I watched the dominoes fall. The first call came into Pinnacle Trust in November. Julian had missed a payment on his commercial loan. The bank, panicking over their own liquidity crisis, refused to grant him an extension. A month later, he missed the mortgage payment on the house. I pulled up his file on my monitor. The numbers were catastrophic. He had cross-collateralized everything. The house secured the business loan. The business secured Vanessa's boutique. The personal line of credit was tied to the lake cabin. It was a beautiful, intricate web of absolute financial suicide. By March of 2022, Pinnacle Trust was officially underwater. The FDIC was sniffing around, and the board of directors was desperate for a bailout. Sterling and Partners swooped in. The boardroom of Pinnacle Trust smelled like old leather and fear. The bank's executives looked exhausted. Their ties loosened. Coffee cups scattered across the long conference table. I sat at the opposite end, flanked by my legal team. We are willing to acquire 51% of Pinnacle Trust, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence of the room. We will inject enough capital to satisfy the federal regulators. In exchange, Sterling and Partners takes a controlling interest, and my subsidiary Summit assumes direct management of all non-performing loan portfolios. The bank's CEO, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, rubbed his temples. You want to strip our assets. I want to clean up your mess. I corrected him. You handed out millions to unqualified borrowers based on phantom valuations. You can either sign this deal or the FDIC shuts your doors on Friday, and you all face federal audits. They signed. The moment the ink was dry, I became the shadow owner of Pinnacle Trust. More importantly, I became the direct owner of Julian Wade's debt. I didn't move immediately. I let him stew. I let him panic. Through the grapevine, I heard the cracks were forming. Vanessa had been forced to close her boutique. The Range Rover was repossessed in the middle of the night. Her Instagram went dark for weeks, save for vague passive-aggressive quotes about loyalty and hard times. Julian, desperate, tried to call me. My phone buzzed on my desk one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I looked at the caller ID, Julian Wade. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up, vibrating against the mahogany desk, until it finally went to voicemail. He left a message. Clara. Hey, it's Julian. Look, I know it's been a long time. I hope you're doing well. I heard you're doing well. Actually, working in finance now. That's great. Really great. Look, I'm in a bit of a bind, a temporary cash flow issue with the company. I was hoping, given our history, we could grab a coffee. Just talk. Let me know. I hit delete. He didn't want the coffee. He wanted my grandfather's trust fund. He still thought I was the naive girl sitting at the dining room table, easily manipulated by a soft voice and a plea to our history. He had no idea that I wasn't just his ex-wife anymore. I was his bank. The next morning, I called my lead asset manager into my office. I handed him the file labeled Wade. J. Initiate foreclosure proceedings. I said calmly, on all of it, the primary residence, the lake cabin, and the commercial property holding his server farms. Accelerate the debt. Call the loans due in full. The manager glanced at the file. All at once. Usually we offer a restructuring plan first to recoup. No restructuring. I interrupted, my tone leaving zero room for debate. They're in breach of contract on 3 separate loans. Seize the assets. Yes, ma'am. As he walked out of the office, I turned my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The sky was gray, pregnant with rain. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was perfectly roasted. In a few days, Julian was going to open his mail and realize he had absolutely nothing left. And this time, he wouldn't have me to die for him. The foreclosure notices were delivered on a Thursday evening. I knew this because I specifically requested my legal team use a private process serving firm, and I paid them a premium to execute the delivery at exactly 7:30. According to Vanessa's meticulously curated Instagram feed, 7:30 was the exact time their spring founders Mixer was scheduled to peak. They were hosting local venture capitalists, angel investors, and tech sycophants at the house with the sinking foundation. The house Julian used as collateral to buy servers he didn't need and a lifestyle he hadn't earned. My lead asset manager sent me a text at 7:40. Delivery confirmed. Both parties served. I was sitting on my living room sofa eating pad thai from a cardboard box, watching the city traffic crawl along the avenue below. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just took another bite of noodles and opened my laptop to check the overnight Asian markets. The machinery was in motion. There was no stopping it now. I found out later, through a paralegal whose sister worked catering for the event, exactly how it went down. A man in a cheap windbreaker had walked right past the valet, up the cobblestone driveway, and knocked on the heavy oak door. Julian answered it himself, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Mid-laugh. The process server didn't ask for a private chat. He simply raised his voice over the smooth jazz playing from the outdoor speakers, handed Julian a thick stack of yellow envelopes, and loudly declared, "Julian Wade, you are formally served with notices of default and foreclosure on behalf of Summit Capital. Have a good night." The music didn't stop. But the party did. Julian had tried to laugh it off. He told his guests it was a clerical error, a mix-up with a former vendor. But the panic on his face had betrayed him. Investors are like sharks. They can smell blood in the water from a mile away. By 8:15, the house was empty. The caterers packed up early. The next morning, The reality of the acceleration clause set in. When a borrower defaults on multiple cross-collateralized loans, the bank doesn't just ask for the missed payments, they demand the entire principal balance immediately. Julian owed Pinnacle Trust, now Summit Capital, just under $4.2 million. He had 30 days to cure the default or surrender the assets. He didn't have $4 million. He didn't even have $4,000. His startup's payroll bounced that Friday. By Monday, his lead engineers had walked out, taking their proprietary code knowledge with them. Then came the collateral damage. On Wednesday, the landlord of Vanessa's downtown boutique arrived with a locksmith. Because her business loan was tied to Julian's defaulting line of credit, her operating accounts were frozen. I sat at my desk at Sterling and Partners reviewing the commercial real estate reports and watched the line item for her store shift from active to padlocked. The facade was crumbling, and the rats were beginning to turn on each other. I didn't expect Vanessa to call me. That was a miscalculation on my part. I had underestimated her instinct for self-preservation. It was late Friday afternoon. My private line rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered it anyway. Clara. The voice was thin, reedy. The artificial sweetness was gone, replaced by a frantic, trembling edge. Speaking, I said, my voice neutral. Clara, it's Vanessa. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. We have nothing to talk about, Vanessa. If this is about your boutique, you need to contact your bankruptcy attorney. No, please. She sniffled loudly. It sounded rehearsed. I know you hate me. I know what we did to you was wrong. But you have to believe me, I didn't know about the money. Julian lied to me. He told me the business was booming. He told me we could afford the house, the car, everything. He manipulated me, Clara, just like he manipulated you. I let the silence stretch. I let her sit in it, let her sweat. In my past life, this woman had stood over my hospital bed while I was heavily sedated, whispering to Julian about how my life insurance policy would finally let them travel to Europe. She wasn't a victim. She was a parasite who had simply realized her current host was dead. Vanessa, I said softly. Yes. She sounded hopeful. She actually thought female solidarity was going to save her from financial ruin. When you signed the surety agreement for the $200,000 business loan, you claimed a personal annual income of $300,000. Did Julian forge your signature on that document? A sharp intake of breath on the other end. He told me it was just a formality. He said the bank wouldn't even look at it. But you signed it. He made me. Nobody makes you commit mortgage fraud. Vanessa. You wanted the clothes. You wanted the status. You wanted the ring. I pulled up her file on my computer, looking at the scanned copy of her signature. You are an adult. You signed a legally binding contract guaranteeing a debt with phantom income. My advice? Retain separate legal counsel from your husband. You're going to need it. I hung up. I didn't block the number. I just let it ring into the void when she called back 6 times over the next hour. Julian was a different animal entirely. He didn't cry. He got angry. He hired a bargain bin defense attorney and tried to file an emergency injunction to halt the foreclosure proceedings, claiming predatory lending practices. He argued that Pinnacle Trust had given him loans he couldn't afford. It was a hilarious defense. Your Honor, the bank is at fault because I asked for money and they gave it to me. Summit Capital's legal team crushed the injunction in 48 hours. The judge practically laughed Julian's lawyer out of chambers. Cornered, humiliated, and rapidly running out of time, Julian did the only thing a narcissist knows how to do. He demanded to speak to the manager. He sent a furious email to the generic contact address for Summit Capital, demanding a face-to-face sit-down with the managing director to negotiate a settlement and restructure the debt. He threatened to go to the local press. He threatened to expose the firm's aggressive acquisition tactics. My lead asset manager brought me the printed email. Do you want me to tell him to jump off a bridge? Or should I just forward this to the spam folder? I looked at the aggressive, desperate tone of the email. Julian still thought he had leverage. He still thought he was a big player who could charm or bully his way out of the consequences of his own actions. No, I said. A slow, Cold smile touching my lips. Schedule the meeting. Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. The main boardroom at Pinnacle Trust. You want me to take the meeting? No. I replied, standing up and smoothing the front of my tailored suit. I'll take this one myself. The main boardroom at Pinnacle Trust was a relic of 1990s corporate excess. Heavy mahogany table, brass fixtures, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gray sprawl of the financial district. It smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. I arrived 10 minutes early. I sat at the head of the table, my back to the windows. I didn't bring a notepad. I didn't bring a laptop. I just brought a single manila folder containing the original ink-signed promissory notes. At exactly 10 a.m. the heavy double doors opened. Julian walked in. He looked terrible. The 5 years since our divorce hadn't been kind to him. But the last 30 days had aged him a decade. His hairline had completely surrendered. He had lost weight, but not in a healthy way. His suit hung off his shoulders, bagging at the waist. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by deep bruised bags. He looked exactly like the man who had left me to die in a hospital hallway. He was flanked by his cheap lawyer, a sweaty man carrying a battered leather briefcase. Julian strode into the room, his eyes scanning the empty chairs. He didn't even look at me. He assumed I was a secretary. Where's the managing director? Julian demanded, his voice echoing off the wood panels. I was told the head of Summit Capital would be here. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. Have a seat, Julian. The sound of my voice made him freeze. It wasn't the frantic emotional pitch he remembered. It was low, modulated, and completely devoid of warmth. He turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto mine. For 3 long seconds, his brain completely failed to process what he was seeing. He blinked, stepping back as if he had been physically struck. Clara, he whispered. Ms. Wade will do. I corrected him smoothly. Or managing director. Whichever makes you more comfortable. The lawyer looked between us, confused. Julian, do you know the opposing party? Julian ignored him. He walked slowly toward the table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the back of a leather chair. The cognitive dissonance on his face was a masterpiece. He was trying to reconcile the weeping, desperate girl he had discarded with the woman sitting at the head of a bank's boardroom in a $3,000 suit. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice cracking. Do you work here? Did you intercept my emails? I don't work here, Julian. I own it. I tapped my index finger against the manila folder. Summit Capital is a subsidiary of my holding company. I acquired Pinnacle Trust's distressed debt portfolio 6 months ago. Which means, as of this moment, I own the mortgage to your house, the lien on your business, the note on your cabin, and the line of credit you used to buy your wife's inventory. He collapsed into the chair. His legs simply gave out. No. He breathed, shaking his head. No. That's illegal. That's a conflict of interest. You targeted me. It's capitalism, I replied coolly. You took out high-risk loans from a bank with terrible oversight. You defaulted on those loans. The bank sold the debt to a private equity firm to maintain liquidity. The firm is now collecting on the debt. There is absolutely nothing illegal about it. I just bought the paper. You set me up. His voice skyrocketed in pitch, the anger finally breaking through the shock. He slammed his fist on the table. You planned this. You've been plotting this since the divorce. I didn't forge your signature, Julian. I said, my voice cutting through his hysterics like a scalpel. I didn't force you to launch a software company with no viable product. I didn't force you to buy a $500,000 vacation home when your company was operating at a net loss. I didn't force you to cross-collateralize your primary residence. I simply sat back, watched you dig a grave, and bought the deed to the cemetery. His lawyer finally spoke up, clearing his throat nervously. Mess. Wade, personal history aside, we are here to negotiate in good faith. My client is willing to offer a structured repayment plan, 10 cents on the dollar for the commercial debt, and a renegotiated interest rate on the primary residence. I looked at the lawyer. I actually felt a brief pang of pity for him. There is no negotiation. I stated. Your client is in breach of contract. Summit Capital is accelerating the debt. He owes the full balance today. Clara, please, Julian begged. The anger evaporated, replaced instantly by the pathetic, sniveling manipulation I remembered so well. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Please, I'll lose everything. The business is my life. The house. Vanessa is threatening to leave me. Clara. She packed her bags this morning. She said she won't stay with a bankrupt man. I told you she was a parasite. I said softly. You were right. He cried, tears actually welling in his eyes. You were right about her. You were right about everything. I made a mistake. Clara. A huge, terrible mistake. I never should have left you. You were the only one who really supported me. I stared at him. I waited for the satisfaction to hit. I waited for the vindication. The triumphant rush of adrenaline that revenge movies always promised. But sitting there, watching this grown man cry over his own self-inflicted ruin, I felt nothing but a profound hollow exhaustion. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a pathetic, greedy coward. And I had almost died for him. Stop talking, Julian, I said quietly. He choked on a sob, falling silent. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to use me. And when I was empty, you threw me away. And then you tried to do the exact same thing to this bank. You're not sorry you left me. You're just sorry I'm the one holding the gun. I stood up, sliding the manila folder across the polished mahogany table until it rested in front of his lawyer. Those are the surrender documents, I said, my tone brisk and professional. Sign over the deeds to the house and the cabin, and release the business assets to Summit Capital. If you sign them today, I will waive the deficiency judgment. You walk away with nothing, but you won't owe me the remaining balance. If you refuse, I will drag you through court, garnish your future wages until the day you die, and leave you with a debt that will survive you. Julian stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. You're taking it all, he whispered. I'm taking what's mine. I corrected him. I turned and walked toward the double doors. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Clara, he yelled to my back. What am I supposed to do? I paused at the door, resting my hand on the brass handle. I looked over my shoulder. I hear the thrift store on 4th Street sells cheap furniture. I said, you should start there. I walked out, letting the heavy doors click shut behind me. The aftermath was remarkably quiet. Julian signed the papers. He had no other choice. Within a week, the house was empty. The startup was liquidated. The servers sold for scrap. The lake cabin was flipped to a developer within a month. I didn't keep his house. The property was a liability, just as I had known 5 years ago. I sold the land to a commercial contractor. 2 months later, I drove by the old neighborhood. I parked across the street and watched as a pair of yellow bulldozers tore into the rotting drywall and sinking foundation. The roof caved in with a satisfying, dusty crunch. It was erased. Vanessa filed for divorce exactly 3 weeks after the foreclosure. From what I heard, she moved back in with her mother and was trying to rebrand herself as a wellness influencer. Julian moved into a studio apartment near the airport. He took a job selling software licenses for a mid-level logistics firm. He was back exactly where he started. As for me, I went back to my apartment in the financial district. I walked inside, took off my coat, and poured myself a glass of water. The apartment was quiet. There was no smell of burnt coffee. There was no anxious waiting for a man who was never going to respect me. I sat down at my kitchen island and pressed my fingers against the pulse point on my wrist. Thump. Thump, thump, steady, strong, unbroken. The heart monitor was gone. The hospital hallway was a lifetime away. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean air of my own home. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I truly felt alive. The game was over. I had won. But more importantly, I was finally free to stop playing. And that is how you rewrite history.